When I saw the job posting for a cashier position at Everwood Groceries, I didn't think twice. It wasn't glamorous, but I was desperate for work after moving to this small town to help my ailing grandmother. The store was remote, tucked into the edge of the forest, miles from the nearest highway. But the pay was decent, and they weren't picky about prior experience. My first day was uneventful. I was assigned to the day shift, working alongside a few other employees. The manager, Dave, was a tall man with a buzz cut and an ever-present scowl. He handed me a laminated sheet of rules on my first break. "Read these," he said. "Follow them to the letter, no exceptions." The list was bizarre, but I assumed it was some kind of initiation prank. Rules for employees of Everwood Groceries. If an item falls off a shelf by itself, leave it there. Do not touch it. If you hear a baby crying in the stockroom, inform a manager immediately. Do not investigate on your own. Customers who enter the store wearing hats that obscure their faces are not to be approached. If they ask for help, direct them to aisle 7. Always aisle 7. If a customer stands in one spot without moving for more than 5 minutes, offer them a coupon and ask them to leave. If the power goes out after 10 p.m., evacuate the store immediately and lock the doors behind you. Never acknowledge the man in the freezer aisle. He does not need assistance. "Funny," I said, smirking. "Is this some kind of initiation thing?" Dave didn't laugh. "Just follow the rules," he said, walking off. For the first few weeks, I worked the day shift without incident. The store attracted a mix of locals and passers-by. It was quiet, almost boring. I got to know my coworkers, Nina, a sarcastic college dropout who ran the bakery section, and John, a stocky guy who worked the registers with me. Sometimes I noticed things that seemed off. A can of soup would roll off a shelf without explanation. The stockroom door would creak open even though it was locked. Once, I thought I heard a faint cry coming from the back, but when I told Dave, he just nodded grimly and muttered something about it being handled. Then there were the customers. Most were normal enough, but every now and then, someone would come in wearing a wide-brimmed hat or a hood that hid their face. They moved slowly, almost robotically, and their voices were flat when they asked for help. I always sent them to aisle 7, just as the rules said, though I never understood why. One evening, Dave called me into his office. "We're moving you to nights," he said. I hesitated. "Why me?" "John quit," he said bluntly. "Nina's already covering evenings, and I need someone reliable for the graveyard shift." I wanted to argue, but I needed the job, so I nodded and reported for my first night shift the following week. The store was eerie after dark. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, and the aisles seemed longer, stretching into shadowy corners. Nina gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as her shift ended. "Good luck," she said, "and don't break the rules." My first night was uneventful until midnight. I was restocking the chip aisle when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Turning, I expected to see a customer, but the aisle was empty. The air felt heavier, colder. I shrugged it off and went back to work. A few minutes later, I heard a loud crash. A box of cereal had fallen off the shelf, scattering across the floor. Remembering the rules, I left it where it was. The radio at the checkout counter crackled to life, though I hadn't touched it. "Help me," a faint voice whispered through the static. I froze, my heart pounding. The voice repeated, softer this time, before the radio went silent. At 2 a.m., a man entered the store. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face. I tensed, remembering Rule 3. "Excuse me," he said, his voice flat. "Where can I find canned goods?" "Aisle 7, I said quickly. He stared at me for a moment longer than was comfortable, then shuffled off toward the aisle. Curious, I waited until he disappeared around the corner before following at a distance. When I peeked into aisle 7, he was gone. The aisle was completely empty. Over the next few nights, the strangeness escalated. I began noticing patterns. Objects falling from shelves always landed facing the same direction. The man in the freezer aisle appeared at the exact same time every night, his breath fogging the glass even though I never saw him move. One night, I heard the baby crying in the stockroom. My blood ran cold. I called Dave on the store phone. "There's a baby crying in the back," I said. He sighed heavily. "Stay where you are. I'll take care of it." It wasn't until my third week on the night shift that I broke one of the rules. It was 3:30 a.m. and the store was empty. I decided to check the freezer aisle. The man was there, as always, standing perfectly still. His back was to me, his breath fogging the glass. Against every instinct, I approached him. "Sir," I said. He didn't respond. I stepped closer, reaching out to tap his shoulder. The moment my fingers brushed his jacket, the store lights flickered and went out. The freezer aisle plunged into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, the man in the freezer aisle was gone. The glass where he'd been standing was fogged over, a faint handprint lingering at its center. My heart raced as I backed away, glancing around to see if anyone or anything else was there. The rest of the shift was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line. The next evening, Nina stayed late to stock the bakery section. I mentioned the man in the freezer aisle, half expecting her to dismiss it as my imagination. Instead, her face paled. "You touched him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, why?" "You're not supposed to," she said, glancing nervously toward the freezer section. "He's not a person, Alex. None of this is normal." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at me since I started. "What's really going on here?" Nina looked around to make sure we were alone. "I don't know all of it," she admitted, "but I've heard stories. The store was built on weird land, sacred or cursed, depending on who you ask. People say strange things have always happened here, even before the store was built." I leaned closer. "Like what?" She hesitated. "Disappearances, time loops, people seeing things that aren't supposed to exist." Her voice softened. "Just follow the rules, Alex. They're the only thing keeping us safe." A week later, I was closing up the store when something new happened. While mopping the floor near the dairy aisle, I caught a glimpse of movement in one of the convex mirrors mounted in the corner. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but it wasn't. The figure in the mirror was me, but wrong. Its face was twisted into an unsettling grin, its eyes too wide. It raised its hand, waving slowly, though I wasn't moving. I froze, my grip tightening on the mop handle. The figure stepped closer to the edge of the mirror, as if trying to push through the glass. "Come closer," it said, its voice distorted and hollow. I backed away, nearly slipping on the wet floor. The figure tilted its head, mimicking my movements with a sickening accuracy. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Nina stayed late again the next night, working through her own unease. We fell into a routine of sharing late-night coffee during our breaks, huddled together in the break room. "Why do you stay?" I asked her one night, genuinely curious. She hesitated, then shrugged. "It pays the bills, and it's interesting. I know it sounds stupid, but I feel like I'm part of something bigger here, something that doesn't make sense but matters." I nodded. "It doesn't sound stupid." Our conversations grew longer, and despite the darkness surrounding the store, I found myself looking forward to our shifts together. Nina's sarcasm and quick wit were a grounding force in the chaos. One night, a man entered the store around 11 p.m. He was tall and thin, wearing a suit that seemed outdated, like something from the 1940s. He wandered the aisles aimlessly, never picking anything up. Hours passed, and he didn't leave. At 2 a.m., he was still standing in front of the canned goods, staring blankly at the shelf. Remembering the rules, I approached him cautiously, a coupon in hand. "Sir, here's a discount for your next visit," I said, "but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man didn't respond. He turned his head slightly, his face unnaturally pale. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He smiled, slowly, deliberately. Then he walked to the exit and disappeared into the night. When I checked the security footage later, he wasn't on any of the cameras. The rules explicitly stated not to investigate the stockroom if a baby was crying. One night, around 3 a.m., the sound returned, louder, more insistent. Nina was working late again, and I told her about it. "Don't," she said firmly, grabbing my arm. "You can't." "Why?" "Because whatever's making that sound isn't a baby." Her grip tightened. "Dave says it's been here since before the store opened. It's part of the land, just like everything else." The crying stopped suddenly, replaced by a faint knock on the stockroom door. "Alex," a voice called softly from behind the door. It sounded like my own voice. "Come in." I stepped back, horrified. Nina dragged me away, her face pale. The next day, Dave confronted me in his office. "You're getting too curious," he said, his tone icy. "This place has rules for a reason. If you can't follow them, you won't last." I didn't know what to say. I wanted answers, but it was clear Dave wasn't going to give them. That night, I told Nina I was considering quitting. "Don't," she said, her voice almost pleading. "If you leave, it'll follow you. It always does." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The next strange event happened during my shift a week later. I was restocking the shelves in aisle 7 when I noticed something peculiar: chalk markings on the floor. They formed a circle, intricate symbols carved into the wood. I didn't remember seeing them before. As I stared, the lights in the aisle dimmed and a low hum filled the air. I stepped back, suddenly feeling like I was intruding on something ancient and powerful. "Alex," Nina called from behind me, snapping me out of my trance. "Don't touch it." She grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "What is that?" I asked. She shook her head. "You don't want to know." The chalk markings in aisle 7 haunted my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that the circle was central to everything strange about the store. That night, while Nina and I sat in the break room, I pressed her for more details. "You knew about the circle," I said. "What aren't you telling me?" Nina sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I wasn't supposed to see it either. A few months ago, Dave made me stay late to help clean up after some incident. I found a circle like that in the freezer aisle. Same markings, same feeling like I was being watched." "What's it for?" I asked. She hesitated. "Rituals. I don't know who or what does them, but they always happen in aisle 7. It's like the store revolves around it." A few nights later, around 2 a.m., a truck pulled up to the store's loading dock. It was plain and unmarked, with blacked-out windows. The driver wore a dark jacket and gloves, his face obscured by shadows. He handed me a clipboard without a word. The manifest listed a series of generic items: canned goods, cleaning supplies, flour, but the descriptions were vague, and the quantities didn't make sense. "Where's this stuff going?" I asked. The driver didn't respond. He simply unloaded the boxes, one by one, stacking them neatly in the stockroom. When he was finished, he handed me a sealed envelope and drove off without another word. Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper with 2 words scrawled in red ink: "Don't interfere." After the truck left, I noticed someone standing in the far corner of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the store's lights. They were tall, unnaturally thin, and perfectly still. I watched them for several minutes, expecting them to move, but they didn't. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to get a closer look. As I approached, the air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. When I shone the flashlight on them, the beam passed straight through their body, as if they weren't there. Then they vanished, leaving nothing but a faint whisper on the wind. The next morning, I confronted Dave. "What's really going on here?" I demanded. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "You weren't supposed to see the circle, and you sure as hell weren't supposed to see the truck. Then tell me what's happening." Dave reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a weathered journal. "This belonged to the guy who managed the store before me. He didn't make it." I flipped through the pages, my stomach churning as I read the entries. The store isn't just haunted, it's a gateway. Something old and hungry is trapped beneath it, and the rituals keep it contained. The rules aren't about protecting the employees. They're about feeding the thing just enough to keep it from breaking free. My hands shook as I looked up at Dave. "Why would anyone work here if they knew this?" "Most don't," he said, "and the ones who do either stay out of fear or because they don't have a choice." After reading the journal, I couldn't look at the store or Nina the same way. She had to have known more than she let on, and I felt betrayed that she hadn't told me everything. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked her angrily one night. She frowned. "I did warn you. I told you to follow the rules. What more do you want?" "The truth," I snapped. She looked away. Some things you're better off not knowing. Our conversations grew colder after that, though I could tell she felt guilty. A week later, I encountered the mirror figure again. This time, it wasn't content to stay in the reflection. I was in the stockroom, organizing the boxes from the unmarked truck, when I saw movement in the small mirror mounted above the doorway. The distorted version of myself was back, grinning that same unnerving grin. "Why do you stay here?" it asked, its voice echoing unnaturally. I didn't respond. "You think you're different," it continued, "but you're just another pawn. When it's ready, it'll take you too." Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, slamming into the glass. The mirror cracked, but nothing came through. A few nights later, at exactly 10 p.m., the power went out. I froze, remembering Rule 5. If the power goes out after 10 p.m., evacuate the store immediately and lock the doors behind you. But this time, the doors wouldn't lock. No matter how hard I tried, the deadbolt wouldn't budge. "Alex!" Nina's voice called from somewhere in the darkness. I turned, my heart racing. "Nina, where are you?" "I'm in aisle 7, she said. The air grew colder, and a low hum filled the store. I stepped cautiously toward aisle 7, flashlight in hand. When I turned the corner, Nina was standing in the center of the chalk circle, her eyes wide with fear. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, and the shadows around her seemed to twist and writhe. "It's waking up," she whispered. "We have to stop it." The hum grew louder as I approached Nina. The symbols in the chalk circle pulsed with a dim, rhythmic light, casting eerie shadows on the shelves around us. My flashlight flickered, and the air felt heavy, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. "What do you mean it's waking up?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It feeds off the rules," Nina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The rituals, the weird customers, the truck deliveries, they're all sacrifices to keep it contained. But something's gone wrong. The balance is breaking." The ground beneath us began to vibrate, faintly at first, but growing stronger. "What do we do?" I asked. Nina hesitated, then glanced at the circle. "We have to complete the ritual. If we don't, it'll break free." Nina ran to the manager's office and returned with a weathered, leather-bound book. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. She flipped through it frantically, her hands trembling. "This is the store's manual," she explained. "Not the fake one with the rules Dave gives out. The real one. It has instructions for sealing the entity back into the ground." I stared at her in disbelief. "You've had this the whole time?" "I didn't know what it was," she snapped. "Dave doesn't let anyone see it." The book detailed a complex ritual involving the chalk circle, the unmarked truck's deliveries, and something called the Watcher in the Mirror. "We need salt," she said, pointing to a list. "Lots of it, and a personal offering." "What kind of offering?" I asked nervously. She didn't answer. As we gathered the items, the store seemed to come alive. The lights flickered erratically, and shelves shifted, blocking our paths. Strange whispers echoed through the aisles, growing louder the closer we got to the circle. At one point, a tall, shadowy figure stepped out from behind a display. Its form was human-like, but stretched unnaturally, with long, clawed hands and glowing eyes. It didn't attack, but watched us with an unsettling intensity, tilting its head as if curious. "Keep moving," Nina whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. The figure didn't follow, but its presence left me shaken. When we returned to the circle, the mirror figure was waiting for us. It stood just outside the chalk markings, its twisted grin wider than ever. "You're wasting your time," it said, its voice a sickening echo of my own. "You can't stop it. It's already too late." "Shut up," Nina said, stepping into the circle. The figure laughed, a deep, guttural sound that didn't belong in this world. "You'll see soon enough." It dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, which dissipated into the air. Nina sprinkled salt around the circle, muttering incantations from the book. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, and the hum grew deafening. Then came the final step, the offering. "It has to be something personal," Nina said, her voice breaking. "Something meaningful." I hesitated, reaching into my pocket. My finger brushed against a small, silver locket, a keepsake from my mother. It was the only thing I had left of her. Reluctantly, I placed the locket in the center of the circle. The symbols flared, and the ground beneath us shook violently. Suddenly, the shadows in the room converged, forming a massive, amorphous shape in the center of the circle. It writhed and twisted, its form constantly shifting. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I were staring into the void itself. Nina flipped to the final page of the book and began chanting, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The creature thrashed against the edges of the circle, testing its boundaries. "Keep it contained," she shouted, tossing me a handful of salt. I ran around the circle, reinforcing the salt barrier as cracks began to appear in the floor. The creature roared, its voice echoing with 1,000 unearthly tones. The book's final instruction was clear: to fully seal the entity, a life had to be offered. Nina looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "Take the book and finish the chant," she said. "What? No," I shouted. She smiled faintly. "This place has taken enough from you. It's my turn." Before I could stop her, she stepped into the circle. The creature lunged at her, its shadowy tendrils wrapping around her body. She screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the creature's roar. The symbols on the floor flared one last time, and the creature was pulled downward, vanishing into the earth. The circle's glow faded, leaving only silence. When it was over, the store felt empty. The oppressive presence was gone, but so was Nina. The circle was nothing more than faint chalk marks on the floor, and the air was still. Dave found me the next morning, sitting in aisle 7, clutching the book. He didn't ask what happened. "You did good, kid," he said simply. I quit the next day, but the store's hold on me hasn't entirely faded. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear the hum in my dreams, and when I pass by the old building, I swear I see a faint glow in the windows, like the circle's light, waiting to be reignited. In the days following Nina's sacrifice, I couldn't bring myself to step foot in the grocery store again. The memories of what happened haunted me, but so did the guilt. Nina was gone, and I hadn't done anything to stop her. The town treated the store's strangeness as an open secret. No one talked about what happened there, but everyone seemed to know. People glanced at me differently now, their eyes full of questions they didn't dare ask. I spent hours poring over the weathered journal Nina had saved. It was filled with fragmented notes and cryptic instructions, some written in languages I couldn't understand. It became my obsession, a way to make sense of what I'd experienced. One entry stood out. The store is a tether, not a building. It exists here, but also elsewhere. The rituals are not to appease the entity, but to keep the gateway stable. Without them, it unravels, and whatever is on the other side comes through. That line sent a chill down my spine. The store wasn't just haunted, it was a fulcrum balancing two worlds. Against my better judgment, I returned to the store after hours to confront Dave. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're not the first to come back," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee in the break room. I placed the journal on the table. "What is this place?" Dave sighed, setting down his mug. "You already know the basics. The store is built on a weak point, a thinning between our world and something else. It wasn't always a grocery store. Before this, it was a post office. Before that, a trading post. The land's been cursed, or blessed, depending on your perspective, for centuries." "Cursed? Blessed?" I asked, incredulous. He shrugged. "Depends on who you ask. The people who built here believed it was a place of power, a spot where they could commune with gods or spirits. But over time, it became clear that what they were communing with wasn't benevolent." I leaned forward. "And the rules?" "They're not rules," Dave said grimly. "They're bindings. They keep the store stable and stop it from spilling into something worse." As I left Dave's office that night, I saw someone standing by the freezer aisle. At first, I thought it was another shadow figure, but as I got closer, I realized it was a woman, a customer I didn't recognize. She was pale and disoriented, clutching a loaf of bread to her chest. "Excuse me, miss," I said cautiously. "The store's closed." She looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "I was just here for milk," she said, her voice distant. "You'll have to come back tomorrow," I said. She frowned, glancing around. "But this isn't where I parked my car." When I escorted her outside, her confusion deepened. Her car was gone, replaced by a vacant lot. She turned to me, panic creeping into her voice. "This isn't my town." It hit me like a freight train. She hadn't wandered into the store. She'd wandered through it. I spent weeks delving deeper into the journal and other documents I could find about the store's history. Some were local legends, while others were official-looking reports that Dave must have kept hidden. One report, stamped with the logo of a government agency I didn't recognize, detailed an experiment conducted in the 1960s. It referred to the store as Node 17 and described its purpose as a localized containment unit for dimensional interference. The report described entities like the ones I'd seen, referring to them as anomalous residuals, fragments of whatever existed on the other side. The rituals weren't just for containment, but also to study these anomalies, to learn about the world beyond the gateway. I couldn't resist the pull to return to the store one last time. Late at night, I found myself standing in aisle 7, staring at the faint remnants of the chalk circle. The air felt different here, thinner, almost electric. I closed my eyes, trying to feel the connection Nina had described. When I opened them, I wasn't alone. A shadowy figure stood at the end of the aisle, its form indistinct but familiar. "Nina?" I whispered. The figure didn't respond, but it didn't vanish either. It lingered, watching me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean for you to—" The figure raised a hand, silencing me. Then it turned and walked through the shelves, disappearing into the dark. As I left the store that night, I realized the truth. The grocery store wasn't just a building or a gateway. It was a living entity, feeding off the rituals and the people who worked there. It had a purpose, but that purpose was beyond human understanding. Was it a prison, a research facility, or something else entirely? I don't know. All I know is that it's still there, humming quietly in the night, waiting for the next person to step inside and make sense of its mysteries, or become part of them. I thought quitting the job would free me from the store's grip, but I underestimated its hold on me. It wasn't just a place I had worked. It had seeped into my life, its tendrils wrapping around my thoughts and dreams, refusing to let go. It started with the dreams. At first, they were harmless, visions of the aisles stretching endlessly, shelves stacked high with impossible items. Then they became darker. I'd find myself back in aisle 7, the air heavy with that same hum. The chalk circle would appear, glowing faintly, and I'd hear Nina's voice calling my name. But I was never alone. Shadowy figures lurked at the edges of my vision, their distorted forms shifting and twisting as they watched me. Sometimes, I'd wake up feeling cold, as though something had followed me out of the dream. One morning, I woke up with a strange mark on my wrist, a faint, circular scar that hadn't been there before. It resembled the symbols from the chalk circle in aisle 7. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the scar burned whenever I thought about the store, as if it were reacting to my memories. I went to a doctor, but they couldn't explain it. They dismissed it as an old scar I must have forgotten about, but I knew better. The store's influence extended beyond my body. It began to manifest in my daily life. I'd hear whispers in quiet rooms, faint and indistinct, but unmistakably the same voices I'd heard at the store. Objects in my apartment would move on their own, small shifts that I might have ignored if I weren't hyper-aware. Once, I woke up to find a single can of soup sitting on my kitchen counter. It wasn't the brand I usually bought, and I hadn't placed it there. The label was generic, with no barcode or branding, just a blank white surface with the word "consume" printed in black. The most unsettling encounter came one rainy night when I was alone in my apartment. As I passed by my bathroom mirror, I saw it again, the twisted version of myself, grinning that same impossible grin. It tilted its head, mimicking my movements. Then it spoke. "You can't leave it behind," it said, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "You're marked now. You belong to it." I tried to ignore it, but the figure leaned closer, pressing its face against the glass. "Come back," it whispered. "You're not done yet." I couldn't shake the guilt over Nina's sacrifice. I found myself revisiting her notes, trying to understand what had driven her to take such a drastic step. One night, as I flipped through the journal, a loose page fell out. It was a handwritten letter, addressed to me. Alex, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry I couldn't explain everything while I was alive, but I didn't want to drag you deeper into this than you already were. You need to know something. The store chooses people. It doesn't let them go. The mark is proof of that. There's a chance you can escape its pull, but it won't be easy. The store will test you, haunt you, and try to lure you back. Don't let it win. And if you ever find yourself back in aisle 7, don't step into the circle. Take care of yourself, for both of us. Nina. Her words filled me with a mixture of sadness and determination. I couldn't let the store win. The last time I felt the store's pull was the night I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, the line was filled with static. Then a familiar voice spoke. "We need you back, Alex. The store's not the same without you." It was Dave. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. There was a long pause before he replied. "You don't have a choice. None of us do." The line went dead, but I swear I could still hear the hum through the receiver, faint and insistent. I moved to a new town, changed my number, and started a new job. But the store's influence lingers. I still see the mark on my wrist, still feel the occasional chill that reminds me it's watching. Every so often, I hear about strange occurrences in grocery stores across the country, an aisle collapsing for no reason, a customer disappearing without a trace, employees quitting en masse. It always makes me wonder if the store is spreading, or if it's just calling me back. I've done everything I can to distance myself from that place, but deep down, I know I'll never truly be free. The store isn't just a part of my past, it's a part of me now, and someday I fear it'll claim me for good. Life moved on, or at least I pretended it did. I kept my head down, worked my new job, and tried to build something resembling normalcy. But the mark on my wrist was a constant reminder that normal was an illusion. Some nights I'd wake up feeling that familiar hum in my chest, vibrating through my bones like an echo from somewhere far away. Those nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to pass. One day, while grabbing groceries at a new, ordinary store, I noticed a man in the next aisle over. He looked disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and a jittery, nervous energy. When he caught me staring, he laughed humorlessly. "It gets to you, doesn't it?" I froze. "What are you talking about?" "The mark," he said, pointing to his wrist. I glanced down at mine instinctively, and his expression darkened. "Yeah, I thought so." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can run all you want, but it doesn't matter. It's always there, watching." I left the store without buying anything, my heart racing. In the weeks that followed, the hum grew more persistent. I heard faint whispers in the quiet moments, words I couldn't quite understand. Shadows seemed darker, stretching unnaturally in the corners of my vision. One night, I woke to find the same can of soup from before sitting on my nightstand. Its label was blank except for one word: soon. The final straw came in the form of a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, tucked into my mailbox like it had always been there. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "We miss you, Alex. It's time to come home." The words were written in Nina's handwriting. I burned the letter, but it didn't stop the dreams or the whispers. Every so often, I think about the store, what it is, what it wants, and whether I'll ever be free. I haven't gone back, not yet. But the pull grows stronger with each passing day, and deep down, I know that someday I might not have a choice. Until then, I live my life in borrowed moments, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the day when the store finally comes to claim me, because it will. It always does.